Okay, well, hello, welcome to the 2021 information session for the Fischer Award for Visual Art. I am Keith Waits from Louisville Visual Art, and also joining us will be Deja Jackson from the Community Foundation of Louisville. And we have two guests with us who are previous winners of these kinds of awards. Susanna Crum was the recipient of the very first Hadley Prize in 2013, and she is a visual artist, a printmaker, and a faculty member at Indiana University Southeast. And Naveen Chabal won uh, the 2019 Hadley Prize, and he is a filmmaker with a great many projects going on. But both of these individuals are people who spend a lot of time doing exactly the kind of submissions that we're here to talk about today. But first, Deja, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Community Foundation of Louisville?
The Community Foundation of Louisville is a force for good committed to creating lasting impact and supporting a community where people and place thrive. A thriving community is one that attracts artists and creative professionals and nurtures cultural institutions, both new and established. The Community Foundation of Louisville holds more than 1,800 different charitable funds. The proceeds from these funds are directed by the fund owners, individuals, families, businesses, and organizations that have established them in the last 35 years. One of these funds provides the monies for the Fischer Awards, which we're talking about today.
Thank you, Deja. And Louisville Visual Art has been improving lives through visual art education, community outreach, and artist support since 1909. Louisville's art community isn't just important to artists or art lovers, it matters to everyone. LVA's efforts are directly shaping Louisville's future by providing quality instruction to 1,000 plus students annually through children's fine art classes and outreach programs in schools and community centers. LVA engages, inspires, and improves our region through art. And if I may, Deja, I'll go ahead and say a word about Bill Fischer. Bill Fischer was an important artist here in town, inspiration to many for quite a long time. Um, I'm going to read this to make sure it's right. He had a lifelong love for art. He trained with the world-renowned artist David Alfaro Sigueros of Mexico, and had countless exhibits around Louisville at the Jewish Community Center, Arts Club of Louisville, Louisville Visual Art, and many more. Mr. Fischer dedicated his life to art and established this award to invest in artists working in this community. So we're here today to talk about uh, the best way to go about doing a submission. What are the best practices? What are the pitfalls? And that's why we've asked these two people here, Susanna and Naveen, do this a lot more than Deja and I have. So we'd like to talk first off the Fischer Award. We should probably talk about exactly what are the qualifications. Uh, and the Bill Fischer Award for Visual Artists was created to support artists working in the following disciplines: ceramics, drawing, painting, sculpture, mixed media, printmaking, graphic design, and crafts. Artists working in architecture, photography, video, time-based media, limited duration, installation, or other performing arts are not eligible for this particular award. Both emerging and established artists are encouraged to apply. I would encourage you, if you do fall into one of those mediums that don't qualify, that I think that the discussion here could be very worth your while. There are other opportunities through both Louisville Visual Art Association, Louisville Visual Art, and Community Foundation of Louisville that this advice could apply to. So please stay with us. So let's start with the first thing we want to talk about is. Um, I just read what the qualifications are, and but I also want to get into. Uh, so let's start with this. So when you look at something like qualifications and what an organization or an opportunity is trying to get from you, Susanna, well, where do you start? What's your first step in this approach?
Well, so if I see a call for entry or a prospectus or request for qualifications, they're called many different things. I make sure that I add the deadline to my calendar. So because I'm often doing a zillion other things at once. And I read the qualifications and the prospectus or the call description really carefully to make sure that I'm actually eligible before I spend too much more time. And then usually I have actually written in a notes app, of different projects that I've thought about or the opportunities that might fit. And then I try and match that idea to the qualifications itself, to the restrictions and eligibility of the particular funding opportunity.
Naveen, same question to you. What's your first approach?
Definitely the same thing Susanna said. Get it in the calendar. I even sometimes will put a date that's earlier than the actual date because I know that you put it off, you keep putting it off. And it's just a way to like light the fire just a little bit earlier. And then it's a nice surprise when you realize it's actually due 2 days later. But another thing would be also to, go through the qualifications and the questions and copy them into a Word document, a Google Doc. And in that process of copying it over, you start to see and look at how you can answer those questions and start at least thinking about it in a way.
So just moving your answers between formats is a way of almost kind of making your own eyes fresh to it.
Yeah, and it forces you to read and reread the questions,
And the particular things that a given opportunity might be asking, specific sorts of details. It seems like it's important to be responsive to that. I've certainly seen my share that doesn't. Susanna, do you find that you look at a lot of things and just decide, not for me, I'm not what they're looking for, my work isn't going to fit here, it's not going to be responsive?
Yeah, I think it's the battle that artists and makers have to face all the time, which is, what project is the most urgent, the most important? If one of those priority projects isn't eligible or doesn't really fit for a grant, I want to spend my time working toward another funding opportunity or throwing more time behind something that would help that project. So if it looks like I have to create something that's a non-priority to fit a funding opportunity, then maybe that's not the right time for that grant or fellowship or award. And usually these things come around once a year or every other year, like something like Creative Capital that I've applied to before and not gotten, but plan to apply for again. So in a year goes by really quickly. So if it's not the right time for any number of reasons, I'll wait but make a note for the future.
I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
To piggyback, it's definitely worth your time to search for the right opportunity instead of trying to create a project out of thin air that can fit that opportunity or to force a project that doesn't quite fit the qualifications or what that grant is looking for. There's a lot of grants to look for. Keep searching for different opportunities, even if it's not in Louisville, could be a grant that's based in the South or other parts of the region. Find the right opportunity.
I also think that a question that comes into my mind when I've read a lot of these sorts of things is an application usually asks a series of questions. It's a fairly standard sort of thing, and that a lot of times a lot of artists will respond to those questions with very similar answers. And again, it seems like it's a question of trying to be responsive and also push yourself a little bit. Does that sound fair to say? Susanna?
So if an artist or applicant is saying or rephrasing the same material in multiple answers, then that shows me, if I'm a grant reader or a juror or reviewer, that maybe that this project itself doesn't have quite this strength and the artist hasn't had enough time to really think it out. You should try and have each of your answers illuminate a very distinct part of your proposal and really take that, think about somebody reading it. think about your grandmother or aunt or neighbor reading it and take them on a trip through the project by really thoughtfully subdividing your answers. So you're gradually revealing these elements and answering questions that people may have. Does that answer? I mean,
Yeah.
is that okay?
So Naveen, how would you respond?
Yeah, I totally agree. It's almost like you have to separate your craft from the grant application. I think oftentimes, you know, we don't want to write grants. We'd rather spend our time making the stuff, right? But you have to really separate those two things and specify, like Santa said, as if you're talking to your neighbor or someone who doesn't speak your art language all the time, so that it becomes, yeah, a journey, a story that you're revealing throughout the application. I think so oftentimes you want to speak in the abstract about a lot of the things that you're working on because it is very complex and you want to tie in different ideas, but you really have to simplify and make clear connections of what it inspires you, what your approach is, and how does that revealed in your craft. Like there should be definitely a through line that takes the grant reader through the application. Otherwise, it's just going to sound like just something in the clouds, and it won't really make sense to a reader. It might make sense to you, but it's got to make some sense to someone who doesn't know you so well.
Sound like just chatter.
Yeah.
Well, and
that's a crucial bottom line, is that, writing a grant, it is not an art project.
Yeah.
You use a different part of your brain. Like you are writing for an audience who's not, it's not an artwork in and of itself. So try not to think of it that way. I think would sum that up.
Well, I just want to point out, and I don't think I said this in the introductions, but both Susanna and Naveen have served as jurors for processes for Louisville Visual Art and Community Foundation, and probably for many other situations too. I think that probably once you win some things, you probably get asked more often, but they've seen it from both sides of the question. I was looking at one of the points we wanted to get to was, and some grants can be very specific about this sort of thing, but I think it's important, even when they're not asking it, is how the work you're doing, what's the impact of the work you're doing? It's one thing just to say, I want the money to do the thing that I want to do, but what's the impact outside of yourself? What is it for your community or your school or an educational institution or whatever, what have you? And Susanna?
Well, I think that, so something that I asked, when I was in art school, I was so irritated by the question of like, who is your audience? And my students now, I can see them also being frustrated. Like, my audience, I make art. I make art for people with eyeballs, I don't know. But I think considering your audience is so important. The audience, not just for the grant, but for the outcome of the grant. So who do you want to see it? And that influences how it will be displayed. What kind of impact, whether it's a social impact, if it has a participatory or performative element, if documentation is really the final result of the work. Like these are all really important questions, because you want to think about what are you actually delivering as the outcome that you're asking money for.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, it's like everyone, of course, wants their artwork to be seen by as many people as possible. And that's what you of course, you want that. But yeah, with these grant applications, it's almost like narrowing it down as so that the reader can like imagine that kind of person and the kind of experience they would have when they experience your artwork. And that's where it goes back to creating a story with your grant application. So it's really a way for the grant reader to kind of understand your artwork in a different way and like through the eyes of a different person. So
Well, and that sort of leads into the one of the other things we want to get into is that for visual art and filmmaking, there's a demand to provide some example, whether it's the actual work or some sort of preparation for the work. And I want you both to talk a little bit about the importance of that presentation and what's important in how you present your material and those things. Naveen, I'll let you go first this time.
Yeah, I think, speaking from a film perspective, but even as a juror, seeing some of the applicants for the Fisher Prize, really taking care of the images that you create is important. And there's simple things that you can do to elevate the way your work is viewed. And I think it simply can come down to is showing the references to other people and getting the feedback from them, whether you're showing a fellow artist, a fellow photographer, getting input from other people to see how your work is presented and getting feedback on that can help you showcase your artwork in a much better way, because it's as powerful as your grant is. The visual references and examples of your work can really take it to another level.
Susanna.
Yeah, I think I mean everything Naveen said that I agree with absolutely. I think that placing the grant work within a context, and I wonder that especially like as a filmmaker, maybe making, I mean, the projects are so massive and include teams sometimes, I would imagine. And then some of my work, for instance, that's more research based and has some collaborative elements or some elements of travel, there can be a very large project and a grant could fund a part of that approach or like a chunk of production that was necessary to complete that larger goal, or it's part of an ongoing series of work. So I think presenting in a way that provides context for like the kind of bigger picture. How do I know when the work is complete? If the grant funding is complete, what else has yet to happen, or what's that next step? I think all of that would be really important too.
Well, and when you've been in the position of reviewing or being a juror, how much impact does it have, the professionalism of the presentation, the quality of images? How much can that hurt an applicant if they're not executed well?
I think it can hurt a lot actually, because it's you don't want the juror thinking about the form of how it was captured. If it's a photograph, you don't want the juror to think about, oh, the lighting is a little dark, or if it's like not cropped right in the right way and you can see like the background of the wall or something. You don't want the juror thinking about that at all. You just want them focused on your piece itself. So it affects it a lot.
There are so many good, especially in COVID era, there are so many good DIY documenting your work videos out there. My favorite is one where someone documenting works on paper, which, are floppy and have white backgrounds that have to be color corrected and show shadows if they're, not flattened completely. They're pretty challenging to document. And this video, she turns her oven light on. It sets the work up against the wall on the range top, and then shows like using a lamp to clip her phone to. Anyway, there are all these DIY kind of processes documenting your work with your phone and an app for color correction and cropping, like Naveen said, and kind of correcting that perspective so you have a head-on view. With just some light Googling, you can figure out a way to do it with the materials that you have on hand. You do not have to pay a photographer to bring out the tungsten lights anymore and shoot these beautiful professional photos. Like, you can make it happen. pretty efficiently.
Yeah, and to piggyback off that too, and also to reiterate how the grant is different from your actual work, there's also ways that you can photograph it to where maybe it's not just a complete punch in on your work, but you actually do see some of the context of the work. And so approaching the photography of your work, again, as something separate than the actual work itself, and figuring out what's a really interesting way to photograph the work can also elevate the presentation of the work.
Gosh, and having to be really creative if you have durational work or moving images,
Yeah.
films, how do you distill that to a still image if that's necessary? And many grants, still will just look at JPEGs and not movie files. So
Yeah.
that's another set of decisions to make.
And even with that too, with like some film work, sometimes you don't even take a still from the movie. You go out with your main characters or protagonist and you essentially do like a photo shoot for stills that could be from the movie. And that's a way to present the project in itself, because we obviously are applying for a grant to make the movie, so we haven't made the movie yet. So coming up with creative ways to present your work is essential.
And I think a lot of what you're talking about too, when you talk about durational work or film, that's where you go back to the writing and the responsibility of the writing to try to pick up the idea of narrative and change and temporal mechanics in work, which is becoming more and more common in visual art. And when you talked earlier about, think like writing about it, how you think, like, what if your grandmother was reading it? So, I mean, when you've gone through the process of writing, because I know you both have partners that you've worked closely with. Naveen, you're a filmmaker. Nobody ever makes a film alone. I mean, I guess they do, but so do you have key people? Is it your partner? Are they too close? Is there people outside of your practice that you go to get that feedback?
Yeah, I think it's a good point, because yeah, my partner Bryn Silverman, we work together, and so that's a key element to the grant writing process for us, because we will constantly go back and forth writing grants and going through what the other person has written, giving notes, suggestions. It is a constant back and forth. It's not just a sit down for 2 hours, write it, and then we're done. We're constantly rereading, giving notes, updating, and completely, like you said, we're taking grant applications from previous opportunities and then updating it for the next one, reworking things that we've said as we've understood what has worked in previous applications, and updating it as our process is updated. So we're definitely working with someone or having someone. I don't think they have to be someone who's far away from you or like is not familiar with your work. I think it can help if they're actually very familiar with your work, and you can go back and forth to really refine what's being said and to make sure it's clear.
Suzanne?
I have my mom read my stuff still, but she is a creative nonfiction writer and a professional writing instructor, so I kind of looked out there. Rudy, my partner, and I have read so much of each other's work for the past like 12 years that it's sometimes I worry that we've read so much of it that it's like we're too close to it. So it's good to have somebody who's I think non-art eyes, in case I get a little bit too pretentious and overblown in my language and floating off on the art cloud. So I need somebody to drag me back down to earth every now and then. So my mom's really great at that. So people in your life who are willing to help do not have to have a grant writing or art background, for sure. In fact, it can be wonderful to have a fresh perspective.
Well, and I want to take a moment to touch on the review and selection process, there are several challenges when administering a grant like this. Deja and I both know, and to reach out to as wide a section of the community as possible. It's an open call, and the Fischer Award in particular is one that doesn't. It asks very little. It really asks that you represent who you are as an artist, what your practice is about, in a very intelligent way, and it's giving money just to support your practice. So in theory, it's open to anybody who is a visual artist in those disciplines we mentioned earlier. And then all of those applications, if they all qualify, and again, in this instance, about probably the biggest disqualifier would be somebody who's outside of the geographical region. But anybody who's in that area, who's working, who will take the time and put in the effort to writing the submission can submit. And then there is a jury of 5 people such as the 2 that are with us today, who review all of those applications that qualified and then come together to have a discussion about their top picks. It gets narrowed down to a smaller group. And then usually in person. Last year it had to be Zoom, and this year I'm sure we'll probably be having to Zoom again because we don't want to put anybody at risk. But they sit together and have a very active and interesting discussion through that process. So both Susanna, both you and Naveen have been in this process. One of the things that again has been a challenge that Deja and I are working together to try to encourage more and more people is that we always feel like we don't see enough diversity in these applications, and that's an issue to address on a number of levels with a number of tools. But I want to ask you, talking about when you've been in the position of being a reviewer or a juror, do you feel like do you feel like the identity that emerges from the submission, maybe even beyond the actual work itself, how much does that start to weigh in your decision making, or have you seen it weigh in decision making in the past? That's maybe a tough question, I know, but
it's an important question. Naveen, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think it's an important consideration. But it's hard to come to a consensus as a juror. I remember in my experience, there's a lot of different people with different ideas, and it's not a simple thing as like there's a clear cut, this person had the best artwork or the best piece, and they had the best application. So going back to what I think Keith you had mentioned before in terms of you can't be disheartened by not getting the grant. You have to keep applying, and if your identity is a way for you to distinguish yourself in any form of how you identify yourself and how it affects your work, I think definitely lean into it and use it to help distinguish yourself from the other pieces and the other applicants, because it's so tough to decide and to give someone this prize, that little things that help distinguish you are really important, especially when we start narrowing it down to a couple of people.
Susanna?
I would definitely think too, to kind of add on to those important points, is that, I, as a juror in a situation where, I may know the applicants because they're part of my community, broadly, even Southern Indiana and Kentucky, we all know that there's like a certain set of artists that we keep seeing and hearing about, and that's wonderful, but that doesn't necessarily mean that supporting their project is the safest, best idea. And in fact, that's how we end up with a lot of erasure and not seeing the full diversity of the arts in our state and in our city, is kind of just relying on the old fallbacks. So, and somebody who's really established. Well, what does being established mean, really? And so I try in all of my cases where I'm in some position of power where I get to judge or adjudicate, I really want to interrogate my preconceived notions or reactions to name recognition, or, oh, so-and-so already got that grant, that means X about them. I also think really critically about, it's the funding organization needs to do the work to invite people who may be from marginalized communities, populations, may not hear about the grant in the first place, may not think that they can access it easily. Making sure that application materials are accessible to differently abled people, to people who are using voice dictation or some other kind of way to access materials in the first place. And so as a juror, it sometimes feels I'm going through something so at present, where it feels like with an organization outside of Louisville, where we're really thinking about how we get the applicants in the first place and making sure that the selection is as diverse and as broad as it possibly can be before the juries even sit down to look at the work. And that takes reaching out and connecting, because a lot of people don't feel included or don't feel like it's accessible to them.
Exactly.
That's a great point.
Deja, we've dominated this whole conversation so far. Do you want to add anything to that?
I'm just so glad that you said that, because that's one of the things that Keith and I talked, a lot about today and yesterday. So I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because really that's what we're trying to do at the Community Foundation, not just at this in this award, but in general. But also Keith and I had a really long conversation about what we were going to do to make this more accessible to people. So yes, so I'm very glad you said that.
Right. We recognize that a lot of the typical communications channels that have been in place for so long, it's easy to be complacent and think, well, we put it out there, everybody sees it. Not everybody sees it. And I know just from my own point of view, I'm always finding out about things at the last minute or things that happened that I missed. So even in this world of all this electronic communication and social media, you miss things. And so there's no one way, there's no two ways or three ways. It probably requires 10 or 12 different ways to put the information out there and to connect with people. So Deja and I are trying really hard to be creative in our approach this year and try things we've never thought of before. So, well, this has been great, you guys. Do you have any other thoughts? Is there anything you feel like we didn't touch upon? Any important advice or information about writing this sort of submission or grant application that we haven't touched on?
Naveen mentioned it kind of in passing, but if you are an artist or maker thinking about applying for grants, and if you're just showing it up in the world, period, you should have a Google Drive or some kind of cloud organization device so that you can keep your applications and your statements and all your writing in one place so that you can refer to it and you can reuse it. So think about, this is part of this, like being an artist, you have to be your own business, right? And they don't teach you that necessarily in school. So staying organized so that your future self will have less of a hard time finding things, doing your future self a favor by being able to reuse things, not, copy and paste, but repurpose them. And just stay really organized. And, writing, it's hard to recognize because we love to paint or we love to draw, but writing is actually what helps you get your work in the world and to get money for it. And we need to be comfortable asking for money as artistic producers. And that's something else that we're not made entirely comfortable with in school, unfortunately.
No, it's unseemly.
Yeah, I would just add, Yeah, don't be afraid to keep applying to things and reapply if you don't get it this year. Reapply next year, even with the same project, because now you've spent a year thinking about it, refining what you're doing with it. Uh, don't be afraid to reapply and figure out different perspectives of your own project and how you can shape it in a way that it that takes on a much more bolder perspective than what it was before.
Right. So each time is just a challenge, an opportunity for you to push yourself more,
Yeah.
perhaps, than you present. And I know from having witnessed, Deja and I sit in the session and try very hard not to influence or lead anybody, but there are many times that the conversation has come down to a very, very tight decision between 2 or 3 artists, and then we have sometimes communicated to people how close they came and trying to encourage them to try again, because it was, you can be such a contender. And I worry sometimes that artists imagine I didn't get picked, I was dismissed. I was,
Yeah.
they saw no value. And the final determinations are very tough and very challenging, which is good to say. We have a very competitive field for this award. We really do every year. And I'd say, you get down to those last half a dozen people, probably any one of them would be a very fine recipient, and it becomes a very tough decision.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people feel like I won't go there again, and actually going there again would be exactly the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've about covered it, and I really appreciate your time. Again, we've been talking about the Fischer Award in the visual arts. The application period opened March 1st, and the deadline for that award is April the 5th, midnight on April the 5th. You can go to LouisvilleVisualArt.org, and you can go to what is it? Is it CFL? What's it say?
Yeah, cflouisville.org to learn more. And then,
So
of course,
both, right, both of our websites have the application, and there's information there. But also, I want to thank Naveen and Susanna. I'm going to and Deja too, I'm going to share another image here with everybody before we sign off.
You should also tell them how much it is. I don't think.
Yes. Deja. See, and we had a little joke about this beforehand. So this award in the past has been $5,000, and this year it has been increased by the Community Foundation to $7,000. And I don't think that's not a pandemic only level. I think we're staying there, right, Deja? So moving forward, the Fischer will be a $7,000 award. But again, the deadline for submissions, midnight April 5th. If you have further questions, you can contact me, Keith, at LouisvilleVisualArt.org. You see it on the screen. You also, and this is a new thing we're offering this year, applicants may request feedback on a first draft from one of a select team of previous recipients. We can hook you up with somebody who's gone through this process before and gotten the prize. If not Fisher, one very close to it, maybe Hadley, and they can take a little time with you in a phone call or Zoom meeting to give you some feedback, but we ask that you have drafted your submission first. And so again, you can go to LouisvilleVisualArt.org/Fisher to apply, and there's more information there. And I think it's basically the same thing on CFL. It's by /Fisher, right? Yeah. Hopefully everybody knows how to navigate these kinds of things today in this day and age. So I'll just let that stay up there another second. So again, thank you guys for doing this. This is being made available. You're probably watching it on our YouTube channel, and we're going to share it all over the place. It'll also wind up being broadcast on the radio, on LVA's Artabella on the radio, on WXOX 97.1, trying to get it out there to everybody. So thank you, Deja Jackson, Susanna Crum, and Naveen Shabbat.
Thank you.
Thank you.